On June 4, 1942, 5 minutes changed the course of World War II. Three Japanese aircraft carriers, representing the heart of the fleet that had devastated Pearl Harbor, erupted in flames almost simultaneously as American dive bombers plunged through clouds that had concealed their approach. The battle that followed would claim a fourth carrier and end Japanese naval supremacy in the Pacific. Yet this seismic strategic shift emerged not from grand strategy alone, but from individual acts of courage, sacrifice, and split-second decisions made by pilots, codebreakers, and commanders whose personal stories form the real drama of Midway. In the freezing basement of Pearl Harbor's 14th Naval District building, nicknamed the Dungeon, Commander Joseph Rochefort hunched over intercepted Japanese messages wearing a bathrobe over his khakis and bedroom slippers on his feet. His appearance scandalized visiting brass, but Rochefort didn't care. "We can accomplish anything provided no one cares who gets the credit," he told his team, and he meant it. Station HYPO's staff of cryptanalysts, traffic analysts, and linguists, including musicians recruited from the damaged battleship USS California because Rochefort believed their musical skills might make them adept codebreakers, worked 36-hour shifts in the concrete basement with poor ventilation. Chief Cryptanalyst Lieutenant Commander Thomas Dyer kept a sign on his desk: "You don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps a hell of a lot." By May 1942, HYPO was receiving between 500 and 1,000 intercepted Japanese messages daily and could partially read about 60% of them. Enough to know something big was coming, an operation against a target the Japanese coded AF. Rochefort was certain AF meant Midway. Washington's code-breaking office disagreed, predicting an attack on Fiji, New Caledonia, or even the West Coast. The clever trap that proved Rochefort right came from Captain Jasper Holmes, a former submarine officer and fiction writer who suggested faking a water emergency on Midway. Via secure undersea cable, HYPO instructed Midway to radio Pearl Harbor, in the clear, unencrypted, that their water distillation plant had broken down. Within 48 hours, Japanese forces on Wake Island intercepted the message and radioed Tokyo, "AF is short of fresh water." When Admiral Nimitz pressed intelligence officer Edwin Layton for specifics, Layton responded, "I expect the carrier task force to attack the morning of June 4th on bearing 325 from Midway at 0600 with 4 carriers and their cruisers." When the Japanese fleet appeared almost exactly as predicted, Nimitz remarked with a smile, "Well, you were only 5 miles, 5 degrees, and 5 minutes off." Rochefort's reward for being right. 3 months after Midway, his Washington rivals, the Redmond brothers, who had predicted incorrectly, arranged his transfer out of intelligence. He spent the rest of the war commanding a floating dry dock. His recommended Distinguished Service Medal was denied by Admiral King, who considered him one of the most unmilitary-looking officers he had ever encountered. Only in 1986, 10 years after Rochefort's death, did President Reagan present the posthumous medal to his children. "If there was ever a battle whose result could be traceable to the work of one man," Reagan said, "this would be it." Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron gathered his Torpedo Squadron 8 pilots aboard USS Hornet the night before battle and handed each a mimeographed note. "Just a word to let you know I feel we are all ready. We have had a very short time to train, and we have worked under the most severe difficulties. My greatest hope is that we encounter a favorable tactical situation, but if we don't, and the worst comes to the worst, I want each of us to do his utmost to destroy our enemies. If there is only one plane left to make a final run in, I want that man to go in and get a hit. May God be with us all. Good luck, happy landings, and give 'em hell." Then he added quietly, "You might want to tidy up your personal affairs and write a letter home just in case some of us don't get back." Waldron was a rancher's son from South Dakota with Oglala Lakota heritage, a pilot who had studied law and passed the bar but chose to fly instead. He had trained his young crews so intensely that Ensign George Gay later recalled, "We could almost look at the back of Commander Waldron's head and know what he was thinking." That connection would soon be tested. On the morning of June 4th, Waldron broke away from the rest of Hornet's air group, which was flying the wrong course. "Just follow me. I'll take you to him," he radioed his squadron. His instinct was right. At 0920, VT-8's 15 TBD Devastators found the Japanese fleet, alone, without fighter cover, facing 4 carriers worth of anti-aircraft fire in Zeros. The Devastator was already obsolete by Pearl Harbor standards. Maximum speed 206 miles per hour in level flight, forced to slow to 115 miles per hour at 80 feet altitude for the long straight torpedo approach that made them sitting ducks. Gay described watching the attack unfold. A moment later, the sky was filled with Zero fighters. As they swirled madly around the Devastators, it seemed to me I was flying in slow motion while the Zeros were flying in real time. In minutes, every plane was shot down. Distant radio men picked up Waldron's voice, microphone apparently stuck open. "Watch those fighters! My 2 wingmen are going in the water." He was last seen standing up in his cockpit trying to escape as his plane burned and crashed into the sea. George Gay was the sole survivor. Shot down, he grabbed his deflated life raft and a black seat cushion, hiding beneath it to avoid Japanese pilots who might strafe him. From the water, he watched what happened next. The carriers during the day resembled a very large oil field fire. The fire coming out of the forward and aft end of the ship looked like a blowtorch, just roaring white flame. The dive bombers told me they saw this smoke at 18,000 feet that day and really did make a nice fire. I was sitting in the water hollering, "Hooray, hooray." Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise lost 10 of 14 planes. Its commander, Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay, had been so badly injured in a crash landing days earlier, cracked ribs, punctured lung, faced 2 bruised-to-wear flight goggles, that he couldn't technically fly. Asked if he could lead his squadron anyway, Lindsay answered, "This is what I've been trained to do." He was killed attacking Kaga. Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown lost 10 of 12 planes. Lieutenant Commander Lance Massey was last seen standing on the wing of his burning aircraft as it went down. The statistics are staggering. 35 of 41 torpedo bombers destroyed, 0 torpedo hits on Japanese ships, yet their sacrifice created the opening that won the battle. As Gay explained, they sucked those fighters down so that when the dive bombers did get there weren't nearly as many as there would have been if they hadn't come down to get us. When Gay died in 1994, his ashes were scattered over the waters of Midway, symbolically reuniting him with his 29 fallen squadron mates. He always insisted the real heroes were the men who didn't come back. Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky was leading 32 SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise when he reached the anticipated intercept point at 11:55 and found empty ocean. A fighter pilot flying his first dive bomber mission, McClusky faced a critical choice: return to the carrier with fuel running low or keep searching. Arriving at the estimated point of contact, the sea was empty. Not a Jap vessel was in sight. A hurried review of my navigation convinced me that I had not erred. What was wrong? McClusky calculated the Japanese couldn't have passed him undetected toward Midway. They must have changed course. He turned his squadrons northwest, gambling precious fuel on intuition. At 11:55, he spotted a lone Japanese destroyer, Arashi, racing northeast at full speed, returning to the fleet after depth charging the submarine USS Nautilus. McClusky altered course to follow her wake. "Call it fate, luck, or what you may," he later wrote. 10 minutes later, peering through binoculars practically glued to his eyes, McClusky saw the welcome sight of the Jap carrier striking force, 4 carriers surrounded by escorts. He broke radio silence. "This is McClusky. Have spotted the enemy." What happened next involved confusion that nearly derailed the attack. McClusky, unfamiliar with dive bomber doctrine, assigned targets by radio, a message Lieutenant Dick Best never received. Standard procedure called for the trailing squadron to hit the nearer target, while the leading squadron took the farther carrier. Instead, McClusky led everyone toward the nearest carrier, Kaga. Dick Best was furious. Looking down, he saw VS-6 diving on what he thought was his target. With quick thinking, he wigwagged frantically to his wingman and led just 3 aircraft away toward the next carrier, Akagi, the Japanese flagship. 3 planes against a carrier, doctrine considered fewer than 18 dive bombers irrelevant. Best pulled into a 70-degree dive, centering his sights on that big red rising sun painted on the deck. His 1,000-pound bomb penetrated to the hangar deck, where it exploded among 18 fueled and armed torpedo bombers. The blast triggered secondary explosions that doomed the ship. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Max Leslie led Yorktown's VB-3 against Soryu, even though his bomb had accidentally released during the arming sequence. Bombless, he dove anyway, strafing the deck with machine guns while his squadron scored 3 direct hits that turned Soryu into an inferno. The entire attack, devastating 3 carriers beyond saving, lasted approximately 5 minutes. Dick Best was the only U.S. pilot to score direct hits on 2 Japanese carriers in a single day. That afternoon, he led his survivors against Hiryu and Hitter 2. At the 1999 Midway Symposium, 89-year-old Best reflected, "It was more elated and exhilarated that day than ever before in my life, or ever since." But the day's flying cost. Best his career. A faulty oxygen canister released caustic soda dust into his lungs at 14,000 feet, activating latent tuberculosis. After returning from the afternoon attack on the Hiryu, the next thing I knew I was in sickbay coughing up blood. He never flew again. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, the aviator who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, stood on Akagi's bridge on June 4th, grounded by an emergency appendectomy. He had the front row view no one wanted. At 10:24, Admiral Nagumo ordered the launch to begin. The air officer flapped a white flag. The first Zero gathered speed. At that instant, Fuchida wrote, a lookout screamed, "Helldivers!" I looked up to see 3 black enemy planes plummeting toward our ship. Some of our machine guns managed to fire a few frantic bursts at them, but it was too late. The plump silhouettes of the American Dauntless dive bombers quickly grew larger, and then a number of black objects suddenly floated eerily from their wings. The bombs penetrated to Akagi's hangar deck, packed with aircraft being fueled and armed. Chief of Staff Kusaka described the aftermath. "A terrific fire, bodies all over the place, planes stood tail up, belching livid flames and jet-black smoke, making it impossible to bring the fires under control." Admiral Nagumo entered what observers described as a state of shock. He stood near the ship's compass, staring at his burning flagship and 2 other carriers on fire beyond it. When urged to abandon ship, he muttered, "It's not time yet." Only after persistent entreaties and Captain Aoki's promise to take care of the ship did Nagumo agree to escape through the forward window by rope, landing lightly despite everything. He was a judo expert. On Kaga, the situation was worse. A bomb struck near the forward elevator, killing Captain Jisaku Okada and everyone on the bridge. The carrier would lose 811 men, the highest raw death toll among the 4 carriers. But the most haunting story comes from Soryu. Captain Ryusaku Yanagimoto was so beloved that whenever he addressed his crew, they gathered hours early to get spots up front. When Soryu was engulfed in flames, the crew discovered their captain had remained on the burning bridge. Chief Petty Officer Abe, a Navy wrestling champion, was chosen to rescue Yanagimoto by force if necessary. When Abe climbed Soryu's bridge, he found Captain Yanagimoto standing there motionless, sword in hand, gazing resolutely toward the ship's bow. Stepping forward, Abe said, "Captain, I have come on behalf of all your men to take you to safety. They are waiting for you. Please come with me to the destroyer, sir." When this entreaty met with silence, Abe guessed the captain's thoughts and started toward him with the intention of carrying him bodily to the waiting boat. But the sheer strength of will and determination of his grim-faced commander stopped him short. He turned tearfully away, and as he left the bridge, he heard Captain Yanagimoto calmly singing Kimigayo, the national anthem. Yanagimoto went down with his ship. Hiryu alone survived the morning attack, separated from the other carriers. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, described as the epitome of the traditional samurai, hot-tempered, aggressive to a fault, wasted no time launching counterstrikes against the American carriers. His pilots damaged Yorktown with bombs and torpedoes in 2 attacks, believing they had sunk 2 different carriers, but that afternoon, American dive bombers found Hiryu. When she too was ablaze beyond saving, Yamaguchi addressed his surviving crew. "I shall remain on board to the end. I command all of you to leave the ship and continue your loyal service to His Majesty the Emperor." He led them in 3 banzai cheers, shared a final toast of naval biscuits and water, then stayed with Captain Kaku on the bridge as Hiryu was scuttled. USS Yorktown limped into Pearl Harbor on May 27th, trailing an oil slick 10 miles long. A bomb at Coral Sea had penetrated her flight deck and exploded 50 feet below, destroying 6 compartments. Rear Admiral Fitch estimated 90 days for repairs. Admiral Nimitz personally waded into the dry dock while water was still being pumped out to inspect the damage. His assessment: We must have the ship back in 3 days." After a long silence, hull repair expert Lieutenant Commander Pfingstog gulped. "Yes, sir." 1,400 workers swarmed aboard. The Hawaiian Electric Company arranged rolling blackouts across Honolulu to provide enough power. Instead of fixing hull seams individually, shipyard crews welded an enormous steel plate over the entire damaged section. The ship's damaged boilers were left untouched, limiting top speed but saving time. On May 30th, Yorktown steamed out to war. Her crew was not pleased. Radio man Ray Daves recalled, "Everybody on the Yorktown was looking forward to liberty in Honolulu. After nearly 4 months at sea, even 3 days ashore sounded pretty good. Captain Buckmaster came over the loudspeaker and told us he was sorry. No liberty cards for anybody." On June 4th, Yorktown's air group struck the Japanese fleet. Then the carrier absorbed 2 devastating attacks. The first, 18 dive bombers under Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi, scored 3 bomb hits. Yorktown's fighters and anti-aircraft guns were ferocious. Lieutenant Arthur Brassfield alone shot down 4 dive bombers. But the damage started fires, disabled 2 boilers, and threatened gasoline storage. Remarkably, damage control parties contained the fires, flooded the gasoline tanks with CO2, and got Yorktown back underway at 19 knots in under 4 hours. The second attack came from Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, flying a plane with a damaged fuel tank from the morning Midway strike. He knew he could not return. He flew anyway. 2 of his torpedoes struck Yorktown's port side, flooding engine rooms and jamming the rudder. With a 26-degree list and no power, Captain Buckmaster ordered abandon ship. Yorktown floated overnight. The next morning, a salvage party reboarded to fight fires and reduce the list. Fleet tug Vireo took her under tow. But Japanese submarine 168 had spent 6.5 hours creeping through the destroyer screen. Commander Yahachi Tanabe later wrote, "The range was point blank and target speed was nearly 0. His torpedoes struck destroyer Haman alongside. She sank in 4 minutes, killing 81 men, and hit Yorktown twice more. Still, the carrier refused to sink. At 0530 on June 7th, her list increased rapidly. At 0701, Yorktown rolled to port and sank stern. First in 16,650 feet of water. Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thatch developed the Thatch Weave defensive tactic on his kitchen table in Coronado, California, using matchsticks to simulate aircraft positions. The maneuver was designed to counter the Zero's superior performance. When a Zero attacked one section of Wildcats, both would turn toward each other, setting up a head-on shot at the attacker. On June 4th, only 6 F-4F Wildcats under Thatch escorted Torpedo Squadron 3, the only fighter protection any American torpedo squadron had that day. Thatch knew the odds. Pure logic would convince anyone that with their superior performance and the number of Zeros they were throwing into the fight, we could not possibly survive. "Well," I said, talking to myself, "we're going to take a lot of them with us if they're going to get us all." The weave worked. VF-3 shot down 6 Zeros while losing only 1 Wildcat. Thatch's honest after-action assessment: any success our fighter pilots may have against the Japanese Zero fighter is not due to the performance of the airplane we fly, but is the result of the comparatively poor marksmanship of the Japanese, stupid mistakes made by a few of their pilots, and superior marksmanship and teamwork of some of our pilots. Ensign Norman Dusty Kleiss of VS-6 rarely appears in Midway's headline stories, yet he achieved something no other pilot from either fleet accomplished: direct hits on 3 different enemy ships, all of which sank. On June 4th, Kleiss dove on Kaga, releasing his bombs at the unusually low altitude of 1,500 feet. His bomb penetrated near the big red rising sun circle, exploding among fueled Zero fighters. He watched as the ship's forward elevator blew out of its place in the flight deck and skyrocketed some 1,000 feet above the doomed ship. That afternoon, he scored another direct hit on Hiryu. 2 days later, he hit the heavy cruiser Mikuma. Kleiss became the last surviving dive bomber pilot from Midway, living until 2016 at age 100. He wrote his memoir at 99, titling it "Never Call Me a Hero," his insistent response whenever anyone used that word. His self-assessment: "I consider myself just a lucky fool." The real heroes, he insisted, were friends like Bill West, Tom Eversole, and Bruno Guido, all killed in the war. The Battle of Midway demonstrates how history's turning points often reduce to individual human decisions under impossible pressure. Rochefort trusted his analysis against Washington's disagreement. McClusky gambled fuel on intuition, best improvised when doctrine collapsed. Waldron led his men into certain death because the mission demanded it. Yanagimoto sang his nation's anthem as his ship burned beneath him. The strategic consequences, Japan's first major naval defeat, the end of offensive expansion, the beginning of the long Allied advance, emerged from these personal moments of courage, sacrifice, and snap judgment. 4 Japanese carriers and over 3,000 men were lost against 1 American carrier and approximately 300 men. More critically, Japan lost over 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots whose experience could never be reconstituted. But the power of Midway lies not in numbers but in the human stories. A codebreaker in a bathrobe, a rancher's son from South Dakota leading his squadron to its death, a dive bomber pilot hitting 2 carriers then coughing up blood, a sole survivor watching from the water as everything changed. These are the voices that bring the battle to life.